The embers of Troy were smoldering against the horizon. After a grueling 10-year siege, the war was finally over. As the victorious Greek ships turned their bows toward the open sea, Odysseus, the brilliant tactician behind the Trojan horse, set sail for his island kingdom of Ithaca. But here's the thing. This departure wasn't just the end of a war. It was the beginning of an entirely different kind of epic. We're not talking about conquering a foreign city anymore. We're talking about the sheer, grueling will to survive the voyage back. And as those shores of Troy faded into the distance, a really profound question hung over the fleet. Can a man who's spent a decade steeped in the absolute brutality of war ever truly return as the same person? It's a heavy thought, right? This journey home was going to demand way more than just basic navigation across the Mediterranean. It was shaping up to be this intense test of belonging, memory, and reputation. It's essentially asking if Odysseus could keep his core identity intact when literally the entire world was demanding he become someone else. Now, if travel were just a matter of getting from point A to point B, his return would have been a breeze. But the gods had other plans. Poseidon, the god of the sea, turned fiercely against him, and this divine wrath completely transformed his journey. It wasn't a simple voyage anymore. It became this profound act of resistance. Odysseus was blown completely off the known map. He was forced to navigate this hostile, terrifying gauntlet where the very forces of nature were actively trying to erase his purpose and stop him from ever getting back. This divine resistance didn't always look like a giant storm, though. Sometimes it struck where they least expected it. Take the land of the Lotus Eaters. When fierce winds blew the ships off course to this strange shore, the men weren't attacked by monsters. Instead, they were offered a seductive, intoxicating plant. And anyone who tasted the lotus, they instantly lost all memory of their past. All desire to return to their families just vanished. So the true danger here wasn't some physical roadblock. It was the silent, deadly threat of simply forgetting home altogether. And that struggle to hold on to who they were became terrifyingly literal on the island of the sorceress Circe. With just a quick strike of her wand, she literally stripped Odysseus' scouting party of their humanity, turning them into swine. Imagine that! To rescue his men, Odysseus had to rely on divine help and just absolute ironclad willpower. It proved that getting home meant putting up a constant, vigilant defense against these forces that wanted to reduce, disguise, or completely unmake them. To survive all this chaos, Odysseus had to carry that burning desire for home right through some overwhelmingly deadly distractions. Think about the sirens. Their impossibly beautiful song literally lured sailors to crash their ships on jagged rocks. To get past them, Odysseus ordered his men to plug their ears with beeswax. But Odysseus? He had his men tie him tightly to the ship's mast. He forced himself to hear that maddening song. He was experiencing the ultimate tension, feeling that intense, ruinous desire, but being completely restrained from acting on it. His path was just absolutely besieged by dangers from every conceivable angle. He faced the sheer physical terror of literal monsters like the six-headed Scylla and the massive, ship-swallowing whirlpool Charybdis, but at the same time, he was battling the mental fog of despair. He was dealing with the agonizing, piecemeal loss of his loyal crew. His former self was constantly being chipped away. It was this relentless gauntlet threatening his body, his mind, and his spirit, all at the exact same time. And honestly, perhaps the most devastating blows happened when salvation was literally right in his hands. At one point, the wind god Aeolus gave Odysseus this bound leather bag containing all the contrary winds. This practically guaranteed a safe, straight path back to Ithaca. But right as the shores of his homeland actually appeared on the horizon, Odysseus fell asleep. His exhausted crew thought the bag was full of hidden gold, so they tore it open. And boom, the unleashed winds instantly blasted them all the way back to square one. This unending cycle of hope and pure devastation brought him to the absolute brink of what a person can endure. The breaking point? When his starving men foolishly decided to slaughter the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios. In retaliation, Zeus destroyed their final ship with a massive lightning bolt. The very last of his crew drowned. Odysseus was left completely alone, stripped of his men, his tools, his path. He was left clinging to a single piece of charred driftwood in the middle of a vast, unforgiving sea. Yet even in the absolute darkest of moments, Odysseus managed to survive because of his razor-sharp intelligence. We see this so clearly earlier in the journey, trapped in the cave of the Cyclops Polyphemus. Facing certain death, Odysseus used his wit to blind the giant. But the real genius? He cunningly told the monster his name was Nobody. So when the blinded Cyclops cried out for help to the other giants, he yelled that nobody was hurting him. They totally ignored him, and Odysseus and his men quietly slipped away. Just brilliant. But here's the catch. That exact same brilliant cleverness could easily become a fatal flaw when the pressure got to him. As his ship was sailing away from the blinded Cyclops, this sudden massive surge of pride just overtook Odysseus. He couldn't resist taunting the monster. He actually shouted his true name across the water. That single moment of ungoverned pride was all it took. It gave the Cyclops the name he needed to curse him, calling upon his father Poseidon and bringing down the devastating wrath that doomed the entire fleet. That very curse is what eventually washed him ashore, completely alone, on the lush island of the nymph Calypso. And this trapped him in a really profound conflict between immediate comfort and his true essential purpose. Calypso offered him literal paradise, eternal youth, immortality. All he had to do was stay with her. Yet day after day, Odysseus sat on the shore, weeping, just staring out at the sea. He rejected a perfect, immortal existence because he desperately longed for the mortal, aging reality of his wife and his rocky homeland. Finally, after 20 long, unimaginable years of hardship, he was granted passage back to Ithaca. But the man who arrived, he was no longer the glorious, prideful king who had sailed off to Troy. Knowing the sheer danger waiting in his own palace, Odysseus arrived disguised as a ragged, aging beggar. His journey had fundamentally changed him. He learned that true strength isn't just about flexing physical power. It's about the endurance and the patience to completely hide your identity until the absolute perfect moment. And that perfect moment was building up to a final trial right in his own great hall. The palace had been totally overrun by arrogant suitors who were eating up his wealth and aggressively demanding his wife's hand in marriage. To buy time, the ever-clever Penelope devised an impossible challenge. Whoever could string her missing husband's incredibly stiff hunting bow and shoot an arrow cleanly through 12 axe heads would win her hand. Well, one by one, the strongest, most arrogant men in Ithaca stepped up, and one by one, they completely failed. Then, right in the middle of all the mocking laughter from these suitors, the disguised beggar stepped forward. He took hold of the heavy weapon. Now, the immense pressure of this moment didn't magically give him strength. Instead, it exposed the immense capability he had forged over 20 brutal years of suffering. With quiet, fluid grace, Odysseus effortlessly bent the great bow and strung the weapon. He snapped the string, and it made a sharp sound like a swallow's cry. Instantly, the entire hall fell deathly silent. In that electrifying instant, 20 years of disguise, restraint, and swallowing his pride were completely cast aside. Odysseus shed those beggar's rags, revealing himself in all his fierce, terrifying glory. He let the arrow fly perfectly through the 12 axes, and then, fighting alongside his son Telemachus, he unleashed his long-held vengeance on the suitors. It was a sudden, violent, and absolute reclaiming of his home, the ultimate culmination of a lifetime of discipline, sorrow, and unyielding perseverance. But honestly, defeating the suitors wasn't the true end of the journey. In the quiet, tense aftermath of the battle, Odysseus had to face his most fragile trial yet, approaching his wife Penelope. You see, all those endless setbacks, the divine punishments, the horrific losses over the last 2 decades, they weren't just cruel delays. They were the terrible price he had to pay to strip away his youthful pride, preparing him for this incredibly delicate, deeply personal reunion. Because to truly be home, just surviving the trip wasn't enough. He had to be recognized. Earlier, only his dying old dog Argos had seen through his disguise. Now, Penelope, who was understandably guarded after years of fending off imposters, gave him one final brilliant test. She coldly ordered their bed to be moved out of the bedchamber. Odysseus instantly flared with anger. He blurted out that their bed was carved directly from a living olive tree rooted right into the earth. It was completely immovable, a secret known only to the two of them. The moment she heard that secret, Penelope finally ran to him, weeping. And in that embrace, the entire meaning of his grueling return was finally realized. He hadn't just traveled from one point on a map to another. By reclaiming his bed, his wife, and his kingdom, his journey culminated in complete and total restoration. He wasn't just some weary traveler anymore. He was a king who had taken all the deep, agonizing scars of his trials and integrated them into his truest self. As Odysseus finally looked out over the rugged shores of Ithaca, forever changed, yet profoundly at rest, His survival stood as an ultimate testament to human endurance. This epic leaves us with a timeless truth that still echoes today. So what does it all mean? It means that home is not simply where a journey ends. Home is what the journey proves you still belong to.